Greetings and welcome to Fiddle Tune Favorites Episode 5, an ongoing ethnomusicological surveillance program aimed at understanding tunes most likely to be invoked without warning at rural social gatherings. Today, we turn our attention to the possibly Canadian classic, Whiskey Before Breakfast, a tune whose title alone suggests a series of life choices best left unexamined. As always, we'll attempt to reconstruct the dubious history of Whiskey Before Breakfast using a combination of hearsay and regional folklore. Then we'll learn the chords, the melody, and I'll offer up a range of melodic variations that are sure to provoke mild disagreement among traditionalists. Whiskey Before Breakfast is a traditional fiddle tune with uncertain origins, but it's most commonly associated with both Canadian and Appalachian old-time music. Some scholars have traced the tune's popularity to the mid-20th century folk revival, when it appeared in recordings, books, and performances by musicians such as Canadian fiddler Andy DeJarlis. In certain sources, similar melodies are referenced as early as the 1920s, though printed versions remained scarce until the 1950s and 60s. So no, we don't have any definitive evidence of the tune's history. There's no YouTube uploads from 1890 either, but if you've heard a different origin story, hit the comments. I'd love to hear it, preferably over a drink, preferably before breakfast. Now, I know what you're thinking. Great, another YouTube video about a fiddle tune I already sort of know but still play wrong. And you're right, this is that video. But we're going to do things a little more thoroughly today. So let's role play the scenario. You just rolled up to the jam. Someone calls Whiskey Before Breakfast. What's the first thing you need? The chords. You need to play rhythm for other people, and you always forget to learn the chords. So let's do that. We're going to do this whole thing like big boys, so no capo, standard boom chuck rhythm, and the usual D, G, A suspects, and maybe a naughty little chord. If you were hoping for capo 2 C shapes, you got the wrong video, bucko. So let's slow it down to 85 BPM and run the chord progression. I'll show you some clean rhythm notation up above, and we'll play along with Strum Machine. Let's do it. Let's get to the meat of it, the fun stuff. I'm talking about the melody. The version I'm about to teach you is at lessonswithmarcel.com. It's in a tab book called Marcel's Essential Fiddle Tunes. You can snag the whole thing for free, or you can toss a couple bucks in the tip jar if you're feeling generous. No pressure. All right, we'll start with the A part here. Remember, these fiddle tunes always break up into 4 easy phrases. One way that happens is that phrase 1 and 3 are the same. Phrase 2 then is kind of a turnaround, and phrase 4 is a tag that wraps up the section. And remember, pick strokes matter. Downstrokes are on the beat, upstrokes are off the beat. If you get this right now, it saves you hours of frustration down the road. So let's play through the A part together and try to get those pick strokes right. Now, if that's a little too fast for you, remember you can always hit the settings wheel on this video and you can change the playback speed to something a little more attainable. Also, the sound of my voice talking will be really silly then, so that's a plus. Now, the B part also breaks up into 4 easy phrases, but this one works in a different way. No phrase is repeated. Instead, we have a long development throughout. Phrase 1 and phrase 2 build tension for the big resolution, which is phrase 3 and phrase 4. Let's play it. Now remember to keep your rhythm and your pick strokes correct. You can count it out if that helps. You can rewrite it down if that helps. You can play along with the backing track. You can play along with me. Whatever you have to do to get those rhythms correct, because if you don't, it's going to be a train wreck at the jam, and we don't want that. So let's play the whole thing together. Let's explore some variations now. So by the time we're done, you should have 4 different ways to play every phrase. So that's, how many combinations is that? So over 2 A parts and B parts, that's 16 phrases, 4 choices for each phrase. So 4 to the power of 16. No, that can't be right. That's like 4 billion combinations. Someone check my math, and let's start with the A part. So the first way that we learned this phrase is a very like stock interpretation of that melody. So for instance, someone might play it with a bunch of 8th notes. Someone might play it with some chord tones or some double stops too. Now, another thing you can do with these melodies is when you find peaks and valleys in the melody, you can push them farther. So for instance, this initial ascent, what if that went even further? That's valid too. Now remember, this phrase that we're talking about is the first and third phrase of the A part. So that's already 50% of the A part done. Now let's move on to phrase 2. This is the one that I called a turnaround. That's how I first taught it to you, but you can also play it with more quarter notes. And actually, I play it kind of this way. When we get to phrase 4, there's sort of a reference to the same kind of phrase. That's also valid. I hear lots of people doing that. But you can do bigger things. You can do greater intervals. For instance, you might do some sixth, or I think this one starts with a 5th actually, but you can do bigger intervals too. I play a lick very similar to that in the opening, if not that exact lick. The other thing that you can do is you can create scalar patterns. So you can see that the way that this phrase is built is the same in the first measure and in the second measure. It sounds like this. You see how it's that same hill that we're climbing, we're just doing it over 2 different chords. That works great too. Now moving on to the end of the A part, we're talking about the tag now. We're talking about measures 7 and 8. So the way that I played it was like this. Remember, like I said earlier when we were talking about phrase 2, this has more quarter notes, right? You can also do that with arpeggios. I really like this. I think I got that from Mickey Abraham. In fact, there's a handful of phrases in here that I got from Mickey Abraham. Here's another one that I played in the opening break. That one's really based on this descending line. Those notes are hidden in this lick. Now, when you have a bunch of chord changes like this, you can also pick a motif, an idea that you can play over each chord change almost like we were talking about with those scalar patterns, and you can just move that idea to each new chord. That works great too. Hopefully you're starting to see how many different things Whiskey Before Breakfast actually is. This should be an inspiration to sort of not get married to the first arrangement that I showed you, because all these variations are valid interpretations of the tune. Once again, think about how crazy I played it in the very beginning. That's still Whiskey Before Breakfast. So anyway, let's move on to the B part. This first phrase in the B part, I actually showed you kind of a fancy version of. Most people don't play it like that, but I thought it was cool, so I put it in that first arrangement that I showed you. Most people play it more like this. Another thing you can do is toggles. I feel like I've been talking about toggles so much, but I stole that word from Andy Hadfield, and it's basically rocking back and forth on any note. And so here's that phrase interpreted with toggles. We're moving on to phrase 2 of the B part. That would be open E string. You can also float. That's one of my favorite techniques, and that means that we're fretting up the neck and we're including open strings down here by the nut, right? Watch out for all these slides. It would sound like this. All right, moving on to the second phrase of the B part is when we're playing over the E minor chord to the A chord. It's sort of a 2-5 movement. It sounds like this. We'd resolve back on that D. When you think about this phrase, nothing is really happening over the E minor chord. We're stalling. And then we get all this busyness over the A chord. So you can think about it like you're picking 2 techniques. How are you going to stall for time over E minor, and how are you going to play the line over the A chord? So maybe you'd play drones over the E minor chord, and then you play thirds over the A chord. Maybe you play an arpeggio over the E minor chord and you would float the A chord. Maybe you'd strum the E minor chord and you'd play sixth over the A chord. Finally, moving on to the third phrase in the B part. This is the last phrase we're going to do because we already covered the tag. So the tag that we learned for the A part, you can also use for the B part. So those 4 choices are the same. So let's talk about phrase 3 of the B part. This is how I showed you. Once again, pretty stock. That's how a lot of people play it. You could play it with more quarter notes. You can play it with a different pattern, so you might backstep it. Or you could play it with a much smaller pattern. Maybe you just play a bunch of thirds. Studying variations is where you really start to develop your own voice. It's like learning how to speak with an accent versus just repeating phrases phonetically, or learning a new language from a phrase book instead of learning how to actually speak the language. I want you to speak the language. And that's the neat thing, that maybe it takes a little bit of time to realize and really understand, but there is no one correct way to play Whiskey Before Breakfast. As a bluegrass musician, you're kind of expected to interpret it a little bit, understand the tune well enough that you could play it in multiple different ways. And what I showed you today is just one path, or maybe 4 billion paths, I guess. Now it's your turn to shape the tune, to mold it into what you want. So get creative, post it, tag me. I want to hear it. Like I said earlier, you can grab the tab at lessonswithmarcel.com. We have hundreds and hundreds of bluegrass guitar tabs over there. They're all free to download. You can donate if you want. You can also grab the signature Marcel guitar pick. Thank you guys so much for ordering so many of these. I want to blush, you know what I'm saying? It's my first signature item and you're all loving it. Thank you. You can also book a private lesson with me or our other expert instructors. We have a great teaching staff at lessonswithmarcel.com. So make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time, maybe after lunch or something.